Hi everyone, how are you doing today? Just need to check my cameras. Hopefully today I won't bang into them like I did last time. So if you're watching, go ahead and say hi in the chat so everyone can chat with each other. And we'll just wait a few more minutes. If you didn't, oh hi Christine. I guess I should say Chris. It says Chris there. So if you didn't check Facebook, Miss Loreens Schoolhouse Facebook yesterday, this pillowcase for the body of the pillow is 3/4 of a yard. The cuff is 1/4 of a yard. So in essence, if you bought in this trim, you can have on or not, and you can make it whatever size you want to. This one's about 1.5 inches, folded in half. That's 3 inches, and then add a 1/2 inch because it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you've got it folded over. So whatever distance you want, it's folded in half, and add a 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. So this one is 1.5, so that's 3. So that one's 3.5. And you can, make it whatever size you'd like. So if you bought a yard of 2 different fabrics, and then you bought, let me see, so say 4 inches, 4 and 4, and then you bought I guess a 1/4 yard it would have to be, of trim for both, then because it's a yard total, 3/4 of a yard, 1/4 of a yard, so you could get 2 pillows out of 2 yards. The cuff and the body would just be reversed from each other. How's that for I'm looking to see how I sewed this. Okay, so this one's done on the serger, which will be even faster. So there we go. That's what a serger seam looks like. So the serger cuts it off and makes it all neat, so you don't have to go back and zigzag it. Today we're going to do a French seam because I'm sewing it on the sewing machine. But if you're following along and you're following along on your serger, you'll just skip the French seam part. So when I come to the French seam part, you can, stop and make a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. Are you sewing along, Christine? Is it just me and you today? You still got another minute or so to go, just to make sure everybody has time. It was nice and sunny out here in New Hampshire. I went out and cleaned my car off and all that, and it was nice and sunny. It's still nice out, but it's not quite as sunny as it was. I might as well give you a weather report while we're waiting. I think there's more snow coming. But, you know, it is February. Someone was telling me the other day that the snow season's almost over, and I just laughed. Actually, I laughed. Because the snow season could be April. Right, Christine? It looks like for today. You mean it's going to snow today? Is it? Oh, I see some blue skies out there, Christine. You're down in Massachusetts. You get different weather than we get in New Hampshire. Okay, so it looks like we're about ready to start. It's Christine and I sewing today. So in my machine, I have a Microtex 7010 needle, regular sewing thread. I just want to repeat again because I'm going to go back at some point and cut out some of that music at the beginning so that when people listen to it later on, they don't have to go through 15 minutes of that. Hi, Cammie. You going to work on your serger today? This is a good serger project. Okay, so again, it's a 3/4 of a yard for the body of the pillow, 1/4 of a yard for the cuff, and the trim is this particular one was cut 3.5 because you fold it in half. A 1/2 inch of that will be a seam allowance. A seam allowance is a 1/4 inch, but because you have it folded in half, a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch is a 1/2 inch. I'm pretty good at that. And this measures about 1.5. And you can have no trim. So you can have it, no, oh, here, look, this is how it would look with a little trim. How's that? I'll give you a preview. There's a little trim. There's the bigger trim. This is kind of big. And it is loose, but it's all sewn in. So, oh, Cammie, you don't have enough fabric. Sew some together. Oh, hey, Jane. Jane's sewing along with me. Thanks, Jane. I didn't want to be sewing by myself. Oh, sorry, you're not supposed to see this, but I'll give you a little peek. I'm trying to make us an Easter basket with appliques around the edge. So see if I get there. Okay, so I got my fabric out, and I have a lot of this one because it's going to be the backing for a quilt, and I figured it could spare 3/4 of a yard. Well, Cammie, you could sew some fabrics together in stripes, and then you'd have enough. So I cut my salvage off, and you don't have to do that yet, but I cut my salvage off to remind me, in case you don't know. So when you see all these numbers and colors in a row, that's all the colors that went into making, came off of this one, into making this fabric. So if you have this fabric and you really like it and you're going to make a bag, quilt, placemats, table runner, whatever you're going to make, if you just look here, all of these colors, so you could will go with this fabric. So you could pick like a light, medium, and a dark. Big print, so this is a big print, so small print, and I always try to put in a linear, which means lines. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be lines, but it has to have the look of lines, not just lines like this. Sometimes you might have like rows of little flowers, but they're linear. They're all in a row. So that's what that's good for. So you can take that to the store with you. and get your fabric. Of course, I'd always bring this anyway, but this will really tell you what goes with your fabric. If you get a fat quarter, depends which end of the fat quarter you get and which part of the fat quarter, so you won't always see this. Or if you got a quarter of a yard. But if you got yardage, you know, if you got a quarter of a yard or a half a yard, you might be lucky to get that part. But generally it's on yardage. So I just wanted to leave that out. So you don't have to, let me move this out of the way a little bit. So we aren't cutting off our salvages yet, because every fabric, width of fabric is salvage to salvage, so top to bottom, and they're not always the same. So we'll just leave those on for the moment. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our trim. So that's this little part right here. And I'm going to have a pretty big trim. So I think I'm going to trim my trim down a little bit more. So this one right now is 4. So I'm going to make this one 3. And of course you would have done that beforehand. I wouldn't want you to always like cut it 4 and then you know, cut an inch off. And it might depend on who you're making the pillowcase for, whether you want more trim or less trim. So you're going to have your ironing board out. And you know me, I'm on the little fellow. I was just looking around because I think I have a bigger one of these, I believe. So we're going to fold our trim in half, wrong sides together. And you can lay yours out on your ironing board. So we're putting the raw edges together. And we're giving it a press. When I figure out how to properly do a giveaway, I'm going to give away one of these little irons. Not mine, not my used one. When I get to, my goal is to have 1,000 subscribers, but right now my goal is 500. So I'll have to read up on it and figure out how that works, so that I think it automatically picks it from my subscribers. And try to stay as straight with keep your raw edges together as close as possible. They don't necessarily have to be perfect because they're going to be partly in the seam, but try to do a fairly good job. Okay, so you have your trim already? So I'm just going to set the trim right there for the moment. Now, I'm going to try to do this way. Hopefully I have enough room. So get your pins ready. Got my pin cushion right here. And we're going to lay our I'm having a moment now. Yes, this is right side up. I'm sorry I paused. I didn't doze off. I had a moment. Yeah, right side up. And you can lay yours out on your work table or on your ironing board. And we're going to take the trim And we're going to take the folded side is towards the fabric. So the two raw edges are at the raw edge of the cuff. This is the cuff. And we don't need to pin a lot because we're going to pin and unpin. You'll see what I mean. But, you know, get it lined up. And you won't be scrunching yours up in a corner, hopefully. I call this the Magical Pillowcase because every time someone makes one for the first time, they think it's like magic when you sew it and turn it right side out. It's like it defies logic. Now, see, I'm a little short here. That's fine. Because this is two different fabric companies. So we good so far? So our cuff, right side up, we're pinning on the long side. Here's our short side. Raw edges, pinned every foot or so. Okay? Now we're going to take our actual pillowcase fabric, the actual body of it, and it's folded in half because that's the fold of your bolt. So we want this right side down, and the fold is, right now it's over facing to the left. But we're going to open this up. So the length of your pillowcase is well, it depends which way it's facing you. When it's laying on the cuff with the raw edge up here, the length of the pillowcase is going to the, it's going, well, how would you be? It'd be going to your, it'd be coming towards you. I'm trying to think of how it would be, because you wouldn't have it stretched out this way. You'd have it stretched out, hopefully. Okay, and you'll know because you got your salvages. So salvage, salvage, salvage. I cut mine off, so I could tell you that little thing. So I cut mine off. So I'm not gonna take it all the way out to the salvage. I want it right side down. So now you see right sides to right sides. Your trim doesn't matter because it's folded in half as long as your fold is facing in towards your fabric and your raw edges are up at the raw edge of the cuff. So I've got to move this down a little bit so I can see it. So, and this is why I didn't want you to pin a lot, because you're going to take the pin out and put the pin back in again. And we're lining everybody up along this edge. And we are going to pin one more time. So don't get too carried away with the pins yet. So I'm lining it up along here. And I'm taking that pin out and just repinning. And you notice when I took the pin out, I held on to the fabric. And hopefully you're able to do yours like on your ironing board or work area. Or you could have a little space like I have here. We make it work. I'm still lining it up. So you'll know which way your fabric goes because all the salvages match on each end of all three fabrics. And then I'm at the end. And while my fabric may seem short, it's really, once I take this salvage into consideration, it'll all be the same size. We'll trim it when it's time for that. Okay, so now, let me see. I have to figure out how to do this. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up here. And I'm going to let my machine be my third hand. We want to be down at the opposite end. So the pins are up the top here. See, can you see my hand? Pins are here. We're going down to the bottom of the actual body of the pillow fabric. And what we're going to do is we want to roll it up. So let me get it rolled up a little bit. Oh yeah, you can see. We're rolling it up. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect. We don't want a big roll. And you'll see why. So don't let it get too big. Okay, so now I'm going to bring it down here. Oop. And I'm going to keep rolling it. And if it's crooked, that's okay. You don't need to be perfect. But we don't want to get too close because we're going to be sewing here. But what we want to do is we're going to bring this up and over. So some people call this the hot dog pillowcase. And I don't call it that anymore because everybody, when I do a hot dog pillowcase class, they thought they were getting a pillowcase that was shaped like a hot dog. So the reasoning is, or some people say burrito, if you think of this as the bun, and your little trim is your mustard, unless you like ketchup, so your little trim is your mustard, and this is the hot dog, and we're going to encase the hot dog inside of the bun. So I'm going to bring this over. Let me flip it around this way so you can see better. And you're not going to have a big mess like that. So I'm going to roll this up one more time. So I'm about maybe 1.5 inches distance away. I want enough distance that I can sew without crushing my hot dog. So I'm going to bring this up over. Oh. And I'm going to pin it the same way that other pin was. So now I've got cuff, trim, pillowcase, cuff, raw edges. And I'm just going to keep bringing that up. I'm trying to do this in where you can see it. So does that make sense to everybody? It doesn't matter if you pin a little bit of the hot dog, but try not to, or the body of the pillowcase, try not to, simply because you want to be able to scoot it out of your way if you need to. So my roll isn't doing the best, but because it's all crunched up here. I just want to make sure it's not near where I'm going to sew. And I want to make sure I keep this smooth and straight. So you can see I'm making sure that my the actual pillow. I'm going to call the main part the pillowcase. Pillowcase is out of the way, so I can feel it's nice and flat here. And if it isn't, just shove it down there. It'll be fine. You just want to make sure this stays nice and flat. And now, once you've got it in there, if you want to add a few more pins, you can do that. So if I wanted to add a pin, now some people put their pins going this way. I don't, unless I was pinning far enough over that it wasn't in the way, but I can't do that because of the trim. So now I'm going to come down, and if this is hanging out, that's fine. As long as everything is nice and, see how it's nice and straight. I'm doing this at a funny angle. Everybody doing okay? I'm gonna turn this around so I can see it. So I'm gonna come down to the end. And the end of my cuff, both ends of my cuff should line up. I'm not worried about the pillowcase part, the main part, but I want my cuff lined up. And if you have a section that looks a little wobbly, then just put a pin in, just make sure everything is nice and flat. And I'm working my way back a little bit because having mine all bunched up, I feel like it threw it off a little bit. And again, just come back and check and make sure it's laying nice and flat. And I can feel right here, I can see here, let me see if I can show you, that the top part of the cuff is real straight and I have extra here. So I need to, and that's why I was off down the other end. So I need to, I'm just going to take a pin out at a time from where I left off. So see how I have extra here. And that's only because, I'm sorry I keep wiggling around, but I gotta face it towards me a little bit. That's only because I was working with it all bunched up at the other end. And you won't be doing that. No bunching it up. Just make sure when you pin, keep an eye on, make sure you check on how your trim is doing. You see now, this area is now nice and flat. And my little hot dog keeps creeping up. The body of the pillowcase keeps creeping up. So I'm just double checking that all my layers are lined up together. This is the hardest part. After this, it gets pretty easy. And I'm going to reach in here and I'm going to just push that pillowcase part back a little bit more. And you'll feel it as you're stitching along. Oh, had thread with me. Okay? So don't put in 5 million pins because that really is not, it's not helpful. So we're all pinned. Let's just double check. So this is our cuff. And our cuff it was right side up. So now when the other half of the cuff comes over, see the cuff is now right sides together. Our trim is next. And since that's folded in half, it doesn't matter which side, as long as the raw edge is at the raw edge and the fold of the trim is facing in. And then here's our pillowcase, and that is right side down. And we're ready to stitch. And we can stitch with, I say 1/4 inch, but if you want to do a little more than 1/4 inch, that's fine. The only thing it's going to do is, you know, your trim will be that little bit narrower, and that's no big deal. Because you want to make sure that you get all your layers. So if you want to come in, I go just a little more than 1/4 inch, just so that you know you have everybody caught in there. So is there any questions before we sew? Because once I sew, I can't show you anything. Okay? So everything is encased inside of the cuff. Alrighty? So let's go over and sew. So I'm going to leave my pillowcase is on my table. Can you see right here? Here's the rest of my pillowcase. Because it's heavy, I don't want it dragging backwards or affecting my stitches. And I want to double check and make sure my cuff is lined up. I don't care about how the body of the pillowcase is. Okay? And I can see there's my trim. There's my pillow, my actual pillow. Because I've turned it over now, so my trim is first. So if I sewed from the other end, here's my pillow first. So I'll sew from the other end so it doesn't get confusing. Okay, so here's my cuff lined up. I don't mind if nothing else is lined up. Okay, so I lift this up. There's my pillow. There's my trim. There's the other half of my cuff. Right sides of the cuff are facing each other, and the pillowcase right side is facing down. And I'm just reaching in there, making sure that pillow part is out of my way. Now, even though I'm going to trim this after, I'm going to lock the stitch only because with turning it right side out, I don't want anything to come unsewn, and I'm not going to trim until it's back right side out again. Okay, Jane, we're ready to go. So I'm just going to stitch forward 3, stitch back 3. I'm going to get that pin out of the way. And then remember how we hold our fabric. Thumb underneath, turning our palm facing towards ourselves. I'm seeing right here. See how I can see where my pillow is? So I'm just making sure that the little culprit didn't sneak up. And I'm bringing the fabric around to the front. See, here's the end right here. See, right there. You know, if you have room, but probably, you know, your lap might not be the best place, but just as long as this whole part isn't dragging back. And the same thing on the other side when it's done. We don't want to have any drag. Make sure you're feeling along the way that your little pillow didn't sneak up on you. Mine's inching its way up, so I'm just going to put my hand in there. I'm holding on because I took that pin out. It's trying to sneak out. So if you're using your serger, you'd just be serging along and make sure that you trim just a sliver off. And check every once in a while that all your layers are right there. And we're getting down to our end. We want to hopefully keep this as close to the other one as possible. If it doesn't come out perfect, it's okay. We're going to trim some of it off, but let's try to get it as close as we can. And make sure that the trim in the pillowcase, I feel like making sure the dish didn't run away with the spoon. And I'm going to lock at the other end. Okay, so let's go back to the work table. So here we go. And we're just going to give this little seam a press. Now, that seam doesn't need to be prettied up in any way because it's not going to show ever. Okay, but let's give it a little press. Because, you know, if we stitch, we press. Well, I was looking for that piece the other day. And I'm just coming along just the seam. And you'd be keeping yours nice and flat. Bless you. Okay, so here's our pillow. What do you think? Oh, hi. I hope it's pronounced Diane. I like that. I like the way you spell it. Oh, thank you, Diane. That's very kind of you. A lot of people watch later on, sit through the first part and then do it after. Sometimes, you know, I make a mistake along the way, so you might want to always be one step behind me. Okay, so this part, kids, husbands, friends, they get a big kick out of this because you go, oh, look, I made a pillowcase. And they look at you like, yeah, okay. So what we're going to do is we want to turn it right side out. So we just got to get it started. And see, because I'm fumbling around with this, that's why I have that seam locked. And that's why I call it magical. Well, let me move this out of the way. Because everybody will look at you like, yeah, right, whatever. Every time I do this in a class, I always worry that I did something, I had everybody do something wrong and it doesn't come out right. Like it stays this size the whole time. The funny thing is, see, that's that piece again. When you're turning this, it doesn't turn like normal because this part, I call it like the curtain, is coming out along with you. So it isn't like turning a regular tube. So you just gotta keep working it. And then just hold one end and grab the other end. My arm's not long enough. Here. I was trying to stay, see? Once you get going. So check that out. Here we go. How's that? Was that magical? All right, I gotta shake mine out because I don't have enough room here. So I'm shaking mine out so that the pillowcase part gets to flow down. And I'm just, oh, you know what that was, don't you? Look, camera. Okay. Now I got to make sure that camera's lined up before we go back. Too many wires. I got caught on the wire. There we go. All righty. So what we want to do now is we want to press. We're going to start. So you got a whole pillowcase. Does it look like a pillowcase now? Or getting to look like one? You know, I think that's magical. We're going to turn it to the wrong side. And our only goal at this moment, make sure your trim is facing down. Oh, was it easier, Christine? The only thing we're concerning ourselves with pressing now is we want to press so that there isn't a crease here. We don't want to crease this because we still have to get the front right, okay? So we're going to try to press so that we're just, and I'm going to press in this direction so that when the pressed part is done, it's going to fall off of the table instead of get all bunched up back there. So I just want to make sure that my trim is facing down. And I just want to get this seam right here nice and flat. Don't come out here, just right here, okay? And of course, you're using a bigger iron, I hope. I hope your pressing mat isn't as small as mine. That would be horrible. Though this is pretty long even. This is pretty long even for an ironing board. So, and I would use steam. And of course, before you started, you had pressed all of your fabrics, correct? Okay. Now you're at your ironing board, so you're going to let it cool for a second. Because whenever you press, if you pick it up while it's still hot, then your pressing becomes unpressed. So you're going to just let it cool for a minute. And then we're going to turn it over. And again, we're only concerning ourselves with pressing this. So can you see? See how I got there's like a little lip there. See? So I don't want that. There's like a little fold there. And there's no way to do both sides at the same time. So again, we're not coming over here yet. Let's get this front cuff, then we'll double check the back, and then we can put the iron on the fold. And I always kind of push that way because it helps make sure you don't have that crease there. Jane, you could use your little, what do we call it? Your little hammy. Because if you put your hammy in here and this hangs down, then you're not going to catch that. I'll have to get my hammy out. Everyone's going hammy, a little hammy. I'll have to remember to dig mine out because it's the only time I think of it is, okay, so I have a real fold here. So I'm grabbing this top fabric and making sure I really push it out of the way. So I'm going to leave my iron on there a little longer. And if I have steam, I'm going to be giving it a shot of steam. And now it's nice and flattened out. Takes a little extra with the small iron because the small iron doesn't have any weight to it. So is everybody ironing okay? Oh, I wonder where Rhonda is. Rhonda that hates ironing. See, Diane, I kind of get to know you if you're in the chat. Oh, we all get to know each other, correct? And you notice I'm still staying away from that folded edge. So how's your pillowcase looking? Oh yeah, Jane got her little hammy at a, what was it, half price, wasn't it, Jane? The last one. Okay, so I just want to double check the back and make sure the back is still looking fine. And now we can go ahead and press that crease that where that fold is. And then while you're waiting for me to press my little cuff folded area, you can go ahead and press your whole pillowcase in case you're all wrinkled up down here. Just go ahead and press your whole pillowcase. Because we're going to be folding it in half and we're going to trim, and we want to make sure that everything is nicely pressed before we do any trimming. I haven't figured out yet how I'm going to trim, but I'll figure it out. So again, once you're done with your cuff, go ahead and press your whole pillowcase. I finally made it to the other end. And don't worry about this. Isn't all going to line up here. Don't worry about that. You didn't do anything wrong. Okay? Jane is using bright florals today. She's dreaming of spring flowers. Yeah, so you lay your head down in your garden of flowers. That means you'll have nice dreams of sunshine and spring. Okay, so once you have your whole, let me see if I can back up a little bit more. Once you have your whole pillowcase pressed, we need to just even it up. So we're going to fold it in half, and I have to pick mine up because I don't have enough room. So I'm taking the ends of my cuff and lining them up because they should be about the same. And then here's my fold. And now if I do that, do you see how far off I am here? So I need to I want to move over so that my pillow, the pillow part itself, I'm trying to do this so you can see. Let's line up the pillow itself. And I'm going to stick a couple of pins in mine, only because I don't have enough room. So every time I move it, it goes off kilter again. What I want to make sure is, let's come up this end. I want to make sure that here, that my cuffs are lining up together and my trims are lining up together. So I'm going to stick a pin right here for now. And that's only, for me, that's only because I don't have enough room to lay this out. And I want to make sure that this top is even. So I'm going to put that pin going this way just to make sure this stays nice and even. Let's see if I can stretch that out well enough. Oh. And because mine is going to be a little more, because remember I cut my salvages off early so I could show you that how the colors work. So you won't be cutting your salvages off of anything until this point. And I'm just putting a couple pins in just to hold it in place. So I want to make sure this is laying nice and flat. I'll put my pin back in. So my fold at the top of my cuff, and I'm pinning over out of the way. See where I am over here? Because I need to trim this up. So I just want to check and make sure that my cuffs and my trim are lined up. Okay, and I'm going to put another pin, and you may not have to if you have enough room. I don't have enough room, but I want to put another pin over here. And the reason I'm doing that is I can't pin here. I'm going to be cutting this off. But I want to make sure I hold it because, as you can see down here, I'm not totally up on the table. Now, generally, your two edges of your pillowcase would match. Now, remember, you've got salvage going all the way down. So you're going to be trimming all the way down. And I'm going to show you how to do that so it comes out straight. And trying to decide which ruler to use. So you really want your longest ruler. I'm going to use a shorter one only so I can better show you how to move your ruler. If I put my long one down, it's longer than my mat, and then I can't show you anything. So to start with, it's the same as when you square up a quilt or you square anything up. To start with, I have to stand up for this part. I'm going to line up this side of my ruler with whichever fabric is shortest. Does that make sense? So whichever fabric is shortest, we have to cut off the rest of the fabrics to make them the same width as whoever's the shortest. So in this case, mine is my my pillow. Now, I've got to look right here because it may be my trim. Because if I look in here, I need to make sure that my trim, so if your pillowcase has salvage on it, that'll teach me to cut that off before class, won't it? I want you to lift up your pillow, the pillowcase fabric, and I want you to see where your trim is. Now, if your trim's way out here, that's fine, but you see how far mine is in. So this fabric is the longest because it's really way out here. Different one company from another. And this one is way in. But I want to make sure that when I trim, I'm not leaving salvage on that trim piece. And because then I have to straighten it out all over again. So the salvage of my trim is just in line with where I'm going to cut off for the pillowcase. Okay, does that make sense? Because once I trim, I can't show it to you again. You're not going to have pins here because pins are going to make it wobbly. You have to be careful with the pins up here. I use flatter pins. If you had flower head pins, these happen to be butterflies, but if you have this type of pin, that's even better because it lays flatter. The only problem with this type of pin is it's not heat resistant, so I only use them when I need something to be flat. So if I use these pins, so one kind of pin isn't ever going to work. You got to have several kinds. Okay? So I'm having my flat, and a lot of them are the flower head pin, but now they have different, cutie things. You just have to be careful with some of the cutie things, like someone had buttons. There were buttons on the end. Well, the button's way too thick, and then your ruler is going to just bobble along. So the flower head, these happen to be butterflies. The flower head looks like a flower. And yes, you can stitch through those. Ask me how I know that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, and you're going to use a longer ruler, I'm going to take a line. I'm not going to do the edge of my ruler because I can't always see that as well. I'm going to take the line, the 1/inch line, and I want to make sure that it's even across the top. Okay? And it should be pretty well even with this seam. Now, is the line going to fall right on your seam? No, mine's about 1/4 inch above, but I can see that it's the same distance the whole way across. Then I got to nudge over to make sure I'm in line with whoever is shortest. We're cutting off the salvage, and in this case, I'm cutting off some of the fabric. Okay? So I'm going to take that pin out because otherwise I'll be cutting my pins off. So you don't have pins here. You'll lay it out hopefully as straight as you can be. Okay? So I'm going to double check, make sure I'm straight across here. I'm straight across my seam. And then I'm going to cut. And it's going to be extra to cut through because you've got seam allowances and Okay? Okay, so we'll say your ruler's not long enough, which it shouldn't be. I hope you don't have a 42-inch or, what is it, 3/4 of a yard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my ruler down, but I'm only going to bring it, this time I'm only going to bring it until the line goes across the seam of where my cuff is, and I'm in line coming down the side. I need to be up a good, what do I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 6 or 7 inches, 8, I want on that cut part I just did. And that will help me maintain the same cut distance or the straightness the whole way down. Because as I'm going down, it may be more fabric, less fabric that I'm cutting off. It depends. Okay? And then, in my case, because I don't have enough room, I'm going to fold this over. I prefer that you don't fold it over, but if you have to fold it over, you need to make sure like this fold is the same the whole way across, that it's lined up here. And I'm going to fold down a little more. And I know sometimes, you know, not everybody can have a big long table. I still want to make sure, now I'm hanging off the table. You're at least going to be on the table. So you want to make sure that this whole pillowcase is lying nice and flat. I'm going to put my ruler back on again, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is back lined up where I already cut, and I'm following something along here that lines up horizontally, whether it's the same distance across, because remember, your ruler is going to be longer than mine. And before I move my hand away, I want to make sure that I've cut. Okay, now let's see if I can move up. I think I can. So now, if you have a longer ruler, you probably only need to put the ruler down like twice. I'm just doing it multiple times so you can kind of get the hang of it. So again, I've got 6 or 7 inches that's on my cut part. I'm looking here that it's nice and straight across here. Now, when I get to the bottom here, let me come in again. Oh, it's a little too close. When I get to the bottom here, it may not be straight across the bottom, but let's try to see if we can be as straight as possible, because we can trim the bottom as well. I don't trim the bottom until I've seamed the side. Only because I don't have that kind of room. So is everybody okay? Now while it's still laying there nicely, now you can put in some of your pins. Or clips, whichever one you want to do. I think this is, I don't know, sometimes I find the clips are a little heavy depending on what I'm doing. The clips like these are. So remember, I left those 2 pins in, so I should be able to just check and see how that's all lined up together. Now, if you cut, and see how I have just a tad of salvage there? That's okay. It's going to be in the seam allowance. We're all right. Okay? So we're going to, oh, shoot. See? Oh, shoot. Because Okay, so here we go. When I'm right sides together, I can't do a French seam. So number one, if you're on a serger, you're all set to go. Number two, if you don't want to do a French seam and you just want to seam it and then zigzag, you're all set to go. But if you want to do a French seam, which is what I'm going to do, you have to have, it goes against the grain of your thinking. You have to have wrong sides together first because a French seam has two seams. Okay? Hi, Rhonda. Is Sewing Nancy with you today? Saturday Sewing Nancy? Okay? So if you're on the serger, fine, go ahead and go. If you're sewing and you don't want to do a French seam, go ahead and go. And if you're sewing and not doing a French seam, do about a half inch seam allowance. Between about a half inch. But you'll want to zigzag your edges. And that's fine too. It's a pillowcase. Or not. It's up to you. Okay? But now I've got to turn mine wrong sides together. Isn't that annoying? So I'm going to turn mine wrong sides together. So if you're going to do a French seam with me, we're going to go turn it wrong sides together. So there's no pin that can stay in. So I'm just going to turn it wrong sides together. You know, it's hard to tell because you cuffs both, but look here, wrong sides together. And again, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So you shouldn't have to trim it again. Your trimming's done. So I'm going to put those two pins over here. Okay, I'm doing the French seam, Jane, so we're going to go wrong sides together. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to make sure that our seams for the cuff are lined up. And I'm going to pin, throwing pins at myself. I'm going to pin a little ways down from that seam because there's just too much stuff in there to pin there. And I'm not going to take this pin out until I stitch to that seam and maybe a stitch over. Okay? So I lined up my top. I lined up my side. I lined up so my trim, and if you have the cuff seams together, the trim should be fine. But I am going to put another pin out here just to be on the safe side. Okay? And now you should be still even again. So we can pin our way down to the bottom. And again, if the bottom of your pillowcase isn't exact, that's okay. We can trim that. But I generally don't trim it until after I've stitched this seam. Okay, so we're good to go. And I'm just going to look at the bottom here, just because I'm nosy. And mine's pretty straight. So if we want to be faster and we want to sew down, and then turn the corner and sew, we would trim this right away. But let's just do one seam at a time. But you can, once you get going on this, you can come down and then straight across the bottom at one time. Or you can come down the bottom and then stitch off and then stitch back on and go in the other direction. Okay? I always start sewing up here because this is more important to match up here than it is to match up down here. Who cares about down here? Because if it's not matched when we're done, we can give it a trim before we sew the bottom part. I forgot to put one more pin in. Okay, so we're good to go. Now we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam. No more than a 1/4. Because this seam is going to be encased in another seam. And the other seam will be a 1/2 inch. This seam needs to be small enough that it's encased inside of that seam. And you'll see what I mean when we do it. And remember, this is a pillowcase, not your prom dress, so we're okay. All right, so let's go sew. Oh, drop my mouse. My pillowcase took my mouse away. There we go. Oh, my machine went to sleep on me. Oh, is that a little bright? Hold on. There you go. How's that? A little better? And I want to make sure, I need to make sure that, now, on this part, I'm going to do a locking stitch only because we're going to be turning it around and fiddling around with it. But I really want to make sure that this is nice and straight together. And I'm using the 1/4 inch mark that's on my plate. And I know with my J-foot that I'm inside of that metal part of the foot. I call it the toe that comes out. And I've got to pick my pillowcase up here because I'm at the end of the table and I don't want this dragging backwards. Okay? And when we get to all this bunch down here, you're going to have to be a little careful. So I'm going to stitch forward, and then I'm going to stitch back. And I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to make sure that everybody's still behaving here. And they should be, because I'm really pinned down. And mine went up over that nonsense pretty well. I'm going to take this pin up because I've passed that seam that needs to line up. And I'm trying to make sure I keep my fabric over here. See where my hand is? I want to make sure this fabric stays nice and flat and straight. Because if it's all bunched up over here, where my hand is over here, then it's just going to make it's going to pull and push the fabric from staying in a nice straight line. And you notice my hand is always holding the fabric when I pull a pin out. And I'll do a little locking stitch here. So I'm just going to go back 3. Okay, so let's go back to the work table. Okay, so these pins can come out. My little chicken holds on to my extra pins. And of course, we stitched pressing as you go makes not perfect sewing look more perfect. Perfect sewing won't look good if it's not pressed. And of course, you wouldn't wad it up after you press it. You'd be nice and straight. Okay, so let's address the bottom now. So I'm going to make sure that my pillowcase is lined up at this end. And you may not have to fold yours in half because you have more room than I have here. So, but I want to make sure that I'm smoothing this down, because I might not be crooked, and just because I didn't fold the pillowcase right, it looked like I'm crooked. And I'm going to just lift up and see if underneath or one of the fabrics is in further that I can't see when I trim, and I didn't trim over far enough. So I'm just going to, again, if you nicely fold in half, you can run that line of your ruler along that fold, and you should be able to be straight along this edge too. And I'm just going to take a sliver off. Just make sure before you do this trim that pillowcase is nice and flat the whole way. I always love how it looks after you trim. Okay. I'm going to move my ruler because we're done trimming, hopefully. Okay, so here's my seam. So now I'm going to be seaming in this direction. I really don't have to pin it because it's held down here and it's held down here. But if you want to pin, go ahead. If you're using the serger and you've got wrong sides together, if you take this seam allowance here and you fold it, if you fold it over and then do your stitching, you'll have a nice crisp corner. Now, I haven't tried it on a you can't do it on the French seam unless we'll do it on the French seam on the last part, because I can't fold this under because there'd be a twist there. I'd have to try that sometime when you're not experimenting. Rhonda, you're pressing today? I'm impressed. I'm impressed that you're pressing. So if you were just regular sewing this way, you can again fold that fabric. See how I just folded over, and the edge of my stitching where the seam was is right at the fold, and then stitch in this direction. Your corner will be nice and perfect. So serger or sewing, but we're not going to do that on the French seam. Maybe we'll try it on the second half of the French seam and see how that works. So now we're just going to do this. Oh, and you're sewing too. Oh my geez whiz. So we're going to go ahead and do the same seam allowance as we did here, okay? So let's go. Oh, you can see where I am sewing. So I'll just quickly, rather than changing the camera again. So see, you can see here's my hand. And here's my other hand. I don't need to lock this one, this seam. And see how I move my fabric so that it's nice and straight this way. Take the time to stop. There's no reward for sewing without stopping. And for heaven's sakes, if you have pivot feature on your machine, use it. Okay, and then what are we going to do? We're going to press. Okay, so now you're right side out, your seam's on the outside, and you're going, oh geez. Now see, there's that little, see the little piece of salvage? I don't recommend you leave it, but if it's there, if that little bit isn't going to matter. But it's going to be encased in the seam. So now we need to turn the pillow inside out as we would normally sew something right sides together. Now if you come up to this little corner, that my finger's inside there, and you, let's see, let's try this. We're going to fold it down like I did before. I'm folding down just that seam allowance, and then we fold it over. I can't do it without both my hands out here. Let's see if that helps us. So I'm going to grab onto that little fold I just made with my fingers and pull it through. And let's see if that helped make a nice corner. Of course, I just let it go, so that's probably not helpful. That's a pretty good corner. And I just want to make sure that we get into it so that both corners are poked out. Okay? Then what I want to do, and Jane can get her little hammy out again, I want to press this seam so it's nice and flat, this where the actual seam is. And in order to do that, I'm going to move it over so you can see there's my seam. And you could put it on, you could put it on your ironing board this way. I'm going to use my little, use what I got. I just want to be over far enough that I don't want to make a crease over here. So my seam is right there. I'm not sure if you can see it. And I just want to give this a good press, because when I fold this right sides together and this seam is at the edge, I don't want to have that little valley, that little crease. And I'm going to push, try to do this without melting my sewing machine. I'm going to push my, and again, you'll be on your ironing board or your hammy. I'm going to get down in that corner as close as I can. And I'm only pressing where the seam is. And it should be that your seam allowance underneath is going all in one direction. That just makes everything easier, whether it's to the right or the left. Mine's going to the left. And I'm reaching in because this is a thicker seam down here. So I'm reaching in to make sure that this is smoothed out, and this part of the seam allowance is going the same way as the rest. Because it's bigger, it might be a wayward seam allowance. And I would put extra steam here. And again, you're going to give it a second to cool off. So I'm sure you're ahead of me because you got a bigger iron. And I need to take a sip of tea before I start coughing. Any questions? I know I got to get down to the bottom too, right? So I want to make sure I do the same thing along the bottom. And I'm just reaching underneath just to have the seam allowance all go in the same direction. Otherwise, it'll be twisted. Couldn't find the other end of my corner there. So I just came in. Now my seam's this way. You see my pressing, little pressing mat? It fit right in that corner. That was kind of handy. That worked out well. But you'll notice, I think you notice the difference right away when you start pressing, how that flattens out and looks better. And if you hear noise in the background, that's not me or anybody here, that's the neighbor. And you're going to go all the way into your corners again. Christine, where can I find the ham? You know, let me get some information, and I'll put a link on when we do next week's video, and then I can tell you, because there's two kinds of hams, and I have to remember where mine are. Okay, so now we want to I got to find the seam again. So we want to find our seam and make sure we lay it nice and flat. And see now how that seam lays so much flatter? And I would now give it a press again. So I'm down at my corner. And it just lays now so much flatter that I don't have to fight with that little, I call it like a tunnel. It's like a tunnel. And you want to make sure the actual seam is right on the edge. And I'm up in that area that's got all those, all that fabric. So I would give it extra steam there. And while I'm at it, might as well make sure the bottom's good. A lot of ironing today, Rhonda. And remember, this is going to be the inside seam of your bag. This isn't on the outside. This is on the inside. And I didn't pick my corner all the way out, so I need I'm going to take a pin and just grab onto that corner. Sometimes doing it this way, I'm just picking at it. Sometimes doing it this way is better than jamming your, oh, look how nice that is. Is better than jamming your corner poking out tool in there and ripping the stitches. So I just used a little, my regular pins. Yeah, you can't see that, can you? There we go. That wasn't helpful, was it? Okay. So let me now that I picked out one corner, now I got to go see if I need to pick out the other corner. And all I'm doing is with the pin, I'm just grabbing onto the fabric and pulling it up. Okay, so now we're going to sew. So here's my seam over here. I want to make sure I'm going to trim off that little thread there. I want to make sure that this is even again, because this is really the only place that's going to matter. I can look inside, and I can feel to make sure that my front and back are lined up. If you're not sure, take a pin and stick it in right at the edge of the seam, and then turn it over. Oh, you see my pin there? And the pin should be coming out in the same place on the other side where it went in. I'm not that fussy. Okay, so I'm going to make sure these are lined up as best I can. And I'm going to put my usual pin going across this way. And if you want to double check and stab a pin through, comes out in the same place. Now, while the pin is in there, can you see that pin straight up? While that pin is in there, nice and straight up, put your pin in. Okay? Look, we're looking pretty good so far. Let's hope the front comes out as matchy as good as the back. I'm impressed with myself today. I think I'm going to have to do all my sewing standing up. Okay, I always want to start here because I want to make sure. I just feel like that's not. I feel like that's not quite where it wants to be, because I want to try to line this up as best I can. Now we're going to take a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Our seam allowance needs to be bigger than the seam that we took, because when we come stitching down, now that other seam allowance, because you can see it right there, is going to be encased. and that's what makes the French seam. Now, you really shouldn't have to pin it because it's already sewn together. But if you want to, go ahead. So here we go. So we're going to go down, and then we're going to, when we get down here, we'll see if we can turn that to continue on. We'll see. We'll see when we get there. Okay, so let's switch over and go sew. Remember, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we need to make sure that we lock that stitch. So I'm going to come on a little ways and then I'm going to go back. So I didn't start stitching at the edge. The fabric is past my needle just a little bit. You'll see here's my needle is right where that hole is. So I'm going to go forward a few and then I'll back up. All right, and we're going to have that bump to go by right there. So let's just be careful. Oh, see, I pulled my fabric out. So I'm going to go ahead a few. So this time I've got my fabric past my foot just a tad. I got to see if I look like my needle's not threaded. No, of course it's not. All right, my needle came unthreaded with all that. So let me just thread her up again. Okay, retake. Getting my pillowcase up on the table. Get myself situated again. Okay, going forward, going back. And remember, you can always turn your fabric around so you can see where you're going. And I'm coming to that little bumpy area. Oh, so that little bumpy area, can you see how much it threw me over? So I'm going to cut my thread for a minute. Can you see that? It really threw me over. Oh, look. So I was sewing along here, and then it shot me over about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to take those threads out. And this time I'm going to pay attention. And also look there, because if you have like one great big stitch, you need to go back and stitch that again. Because that's a lot to get through. Okay, so I'm going to get back in line again. And I'm going to do just a in-place locking stitch. Oh, are we fuzzy? Hold on. There we go. But I need to lock my thread again because I'm starting new. And I'm just going to take my time. So when I get here, now I have on my J foot. Baby Lock Brother J foot. Janome, it's the A foot. And when your presser foot is going uphill, it's not feeding right. So we got a little black button over on this side. Okay? And I want to push that in. Now, if I go to push it and it doesn't go in, I'm going to keep pushing on it, and I just need to bring the front of my foot down. I have to hang on to that button until I put the presser foot down. And now that makes the presser foot straight, even though it's going up a hill. I put my foot down. Oh, shoot. So I gotta get a little bit closer. Okay, now I'm really going uphill. So I'm just gonna hold this, push that, put the front of my foot down. And when it's done, the button will pop out by itself. So I want to look and see. So mine stitched over that fine. If yours didn't, just turn around and go back the other way and then turn around and come back again. So did everybody try that button? Came with your machine. So my eye is staying right here at the front of my foot, so I can see I've got that little bit of fabric that's just to the right. I'm not looking at my needle. Looking at my needle isn't going to help me at all. And I'm just going to lock in place. Okay? Oh, sorry, got my finger in your way. So that seam's done. Now let's turn it. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to live on the edge and see how I've turned my seam allowance down. That's just so that my stitching is right along that edge. Oh. And I'm going to stitch that. I want my same seam allowance that I had going down the long way. Is that going out of focus on you? All right, so I'm at my edge. I'm going to come in a few stitches and go back a few. And you can feel where your actual underneath seam is. So don't get too close. And because we did all that pressing ahead of time, it's just that much easier. Yeah, don't let go of your fabric and keep going. And then I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back about 5 stitches because you know I hate threads at the end. So I go back about 5 and then I come forward a couple and then I cut my thread. Oh, Rhonda, you used your J-foot button? Good for you. All right, let's get to the work table. And you know the drill, what we have to do. I can hear Rhonda. Rhonda, press. All right, so someone has to tell me that, yes, pressing did make that all easier. And it all looked nicer. I'm waiting for someone to tell me that. Now, here's where that edge is. I'm just going to press that little corner. We'll see how that came out. When we turn it right side out, proof will be in the pudding, won't it? So you experimented with me, or did I experiment by myself? Okay, we're done. So I want to clip these threads and see, because I started in a little ways, my thread is not up at that edge. I don't know why that makes me happy, but it does. And I can see that when I started my stitching again, I didn't start it exactly where I left off. So I got to pull some of the old stitches out. See, this is real life. You'll never see me make even if I do a recorded video, I won't take my problems out, because everyone can have those kind of problems. I know, I have to put it away. Pretty soon you'll all have the same habits as I have. Okay, let's give it a whirl. And this time I'm not going to do the fold thing because it's already folded. Oh, I can get rid of the thread. Just turn it right side out. Yeah, I see, Jane. Yeah, sure. I love the pressing. Oh, that's my laugh of the day. Oh, I got a thread. Am I on the corner with, no, is that the corner with the seam? I can't tell, no. Well, the corner without this, what I do with my tool's inside here somewhere. We got a nice square corner there, and I'm going to make sure that I run I'm running this end of my turning tool. I want to run it along that seam. So you could run the side, or if you got a curved side, because we really should press that. But I'm not gonna make you press anymore today. I'm gonna trust that you'll get it done. Now, is this gonna work, or was that a mistake? It's kind of bunchy in there. Let's see. So I'm reaching in and I'm gonna fold that over. And try to push that up. So I'm not sure if that, couldn't find my tool. So I'm not sure with that French seam, if that turning it at the corner is going to make you as happy as it would if it wasn't a French seam. Oh, there we go. It popped out. There we go. I'm happy. Oh, let me get that thread out. All of a sudden, it just popped into place. Hold on. So look at that. Come on now. Let's hear 3 cheers for our folded corner. Nice and straight. It did take a second, and then all of a sudden it just popped right into place. I don't know why I have so many threads. Okay, so, and you're going to finish pressing this like you did before. You're going to, for crying out loud. Open this up. Now this time, I can feel my seam allowance is going that way. You know, once you do this pressing, it isn't like you've got to do this every time you wash the pillowcase. I mean, you might have to press the pillowcase because it's, well, my fabric is 100% cotton. But you don't have to, you shouldn't have to do this again. All right, I'm trying to do this fast, and I'm making myself slower. So for anyone that stitched along or is going to stitch along, make sure that you go to Miss LoreensSchoolhouse Facebook and put a picture of your pillowcase, because everybody loves to see everyone else's fabrics and fabric choices, and it helps them, gives them ideas, and it just makes us happy. And you're going to do the same thing going up the side, but I'm not going to make you watch me stitch. And then when you get to here, just give that a good shot of steam there, because that's where it's bunchy. So look, our end is nice and straight going across. Okay? Let's see. We're lined up. Telling you, I need to keep sewing standing up. We're lined up evenly. That's pretty exciting. And you see inside, Jane? You've got a seam, but it's all encased. So it looks extra fancy. So when you say to someone, oh yeah, I make my pillowcases with French seams, they go, ooh. Oh, thanks, Christine. You like my fabric? Eleanor Burns. It's pretty. I don't know why I threw the gray in. I wanted some polka dots, I guess. Okay, so does anybody have any questions? And doesn't it look so nice inside? Because there's nothing fraying, nothing raggedy. And, maybe a pillowcase, but especially if you're giving them for gifts. And I will say that if you do like Halloween, Christmas, holiday, whatever, pillowcases, whoever you give them to is going to expect one every year. So keep that in mind. Or another holiday. Because there's very few people that really don't like having, novelty, Christmas, Halloween, flowers, whatever, a special pillowcase. Okay, so let me just wait a second to see if anybody has any questions. And if you're new, if you would please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And then if you hit the little bell, that will send you the reminders of when I upload a video or when I go live. And I usually go live 10 or so minutes before the time it actually is. So if you get the reminder, it gives you time to, get on the computer or your phone or whatever the case may be. So I appreciate everybody. Oh, yeah, and don't forget the thumbs up. Thumbs up. No thumbs down. Okay, so I appreciate everybody joining in. And I have to look. I'm hesitating a moment because I can't remember. Is this the last? Is there another week in February? Okay. So next, I do see if I was working next Saturday. So next Saturday will be 1 o'clock. And maybe I'll have the Easter basket ready to work with. Now, we did this pillowcase this way, the Magical Pillowcase. And I wanted you to do this first because we're going to do a magical bag. Bag straps, all that. We're going to do a magical bag. But I wanted you to do this one first. So make sure you try to do at least one pillowcase. So again, thanks everybody. Have a rest of your weekend. Have a nice rest of your weekend. I'll either see you Thursday night at 7 or Saturday at 1 p.m. So thanks again, everybody. Bye.